Anytime I think when you're chasing quality, you're going to be intrigued by efficiency. When you're a craftsperson, that you're kind of always gamifying it or kind of finding efficiencies. I don't think it's unique to Austin that pursuit for quality would lead you to building science, but I do think that there's a community in Austin that is more environmentally aware and more environmentally concerned, or at least wears it on their sleeve a little bit more than in other communities.
So welcome to the podcast today. We have Frank Farkash on with us. Welcome, Frank.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, so previous guest, I had Killy on, and she introduced us, which is awesome. And Frank is the CEO and architect of record at Moon Tower Design Build. And maybe I start here, Frank. Are you a glutton for punishment? I mean, you're an architect by trade, and now you want to do construction. I mean, aren't you trying to, that's like, you know, it's a tough business doing that contractor work, as you well know.
Yeah, it really is. And yes, right. Like I think all of us in the construction business, no matter what point of the spectrum or point in the process, you kind of have to be a glutton for punishment. I think you're signing up for it because of the rewards. Like I think people just get inspired, like being a part of shaping the world, right? Like making it a better place, seeing what you can accomplish at the end of the day.
So how's that been? I mean, that transition. I mean, what made you kind of go into architecture school from the beginning?
Yeah. From the very beginning, I was always really passionate about just creativity. I grew up around it in my home. My dad and my mom they ran a business where they were basically doing design build for like the stage, for exhibit designs and showrooms and things like that for corporate events. And later in my time, like in high school, they started to do model train layouts
Hmm.
as well, like for like museums and
Wow.
like luxury residences and stuff like that. So yeah, I grew up sweeping out sawdust out of table saws and learning how to use the scroll saws to spell my name out of like scrap wood and stuff like that. So it was just something I was always exposed to growing up, and loved playing with blocks and Lego and just drawing in my margins through grade school and stuff like that.
It's
So
amazing. And then
yeah,
you,
from
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, and so then I kind of just kept that like spark alive in college. Studied art at first at a liberal arts school, but then always was intrigued with architecture. I interned at an architect's office during high school because the architect had collaborated with my parents' business on a project. It was for a fanciful bar interior where they needed like specialty sculptures and stuff like that on the interior of the bar. And my dad really enjoyed working with that architect. And one summer, I got the connection to go and organize that architect's flat files and help build models out of cardboard and basswood and stuff.
It's amazing. And so when you were working, so you mentioned that you did some interning, at the architecture firm. When did you realize, hey, I think this is something for me?
That played a big role, interning, and then I got kind of intimidated by the idea of committing to, I guess, like being an architect when the college search came into play. And basically, it felt like I just started to kind of become a passionate learner, maybe. Like I think I was always like really curious, but in high school, like my senior year, just having like an inspiring literature teacher, and a really interesting physics teacher, all of a sudden I started to be like really maybe just more captivated by like the academics of it all. And so I was just really hesitant to pick architecture school like as a college leading to a career choice. So I
Hmm.
went to a liberal arts school, but 2 years of doing that and kind of really being interested in art, taking drawing classes and things like that, I felt like I would kind of like be locking myself out of the potential career in architecture if I didn't
Hmm.
go and do the architectural education. And I chose
Hmm.
to do it at University of Texas at Austin as an in-state school, for in-state tuition, and do it immediately as opposed to waiting for a graduate program.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then What makes you transfer to say, okay, I was doing architecture, now let's go ahead and do the full build, the full design build?
Yeah. So yeah, practicing with architects in Austin for a
Hmm.
couple of years after graduating. Did interning at other architects' offices while at architecture school. Um, but basically, being in these meetings where you're presenting with clients, with the architect, and being unable to discuss like the price of a build in a way that felt really material or consequential, it felt very like uh, it just felt like kind of flat.
Hmm.
And in order to like round out that conversation, it's always about like, hey, let's consult the builder. We're maybe it's going to take a month before we can really have that conversation again. Maybe it's going to involve a loss of control and agency, as the builder provides feedback that really pushes the design or guides these clients in a different direction. And I think that was when I first realized like that to be really comprehensive or to,
Hmm.
maybe have more control or to maybe just to bring more information to bear to homeowners in in the most like kind of earliest phase that you can, where you
Hmm.
can kind of feel the push and pull between design decisions and the budget consequences, that would have to take like being a builder. You couldn't do that like just as an architect.
It's interesting because I want to come back to that, here in a minute, but that perspective is really interesting from an architect's point of view, where you're looking at it, hey, if the builder comes back and they're having us make changes, for constructability, that could impact the design, right? And it's
Absolutely.
it's funny because as a builder perspective, I know one of the, I shouldn't say the drawback, but one of the things to consider when you don't have architecture and design in house is, okay, when I'm outsourcing that or working with outside firms, does that impact schedule delays, right? Because we're kind of at their mercy on how quick they can move through the plan set. Does it affect budget? Because we may have had these budget meetings, coordinations, and then, once it's kind of in their lap and they're working in with their engineers, things can kind of escalate, if you will, or they can change direction. And you're not, in tune with every single step that's happening. So plans could come back, there's some other details, it's a little bit more expensive, and then as the builder you're kind of left holding the bag. And so you kind of have this kind of mixed relationship between all the parties. um, if there's not that communication, it's really hard to do if you're not in the same office all the time.
Yeah, it's almost impossible, right? Like even the best teams are going to rely on really intimate communication in order when you're separate, like when you're kind of like in your siloed seats. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's always going to rely on that best communication. That's only when it's an official channel, right? When it's an email, when it's a phone call. Um, so yeah, getting everybody in the same room is the concept, and those are usually when it's really fun and fruitful in those kind of collaborative teams. So we also do general contracting, work with other architects, work with interior designers, and those are great meetings, right? When everyone's in the same room together, like those tend to be when the most happens. So yeah, like we get to kind of recreate that on a more of a regular basis, like in the design build environment, at least in our kind of ideal world. We still have a division of labor, like but at least we're under one roof.
Now, did you ever have any reservations? I mean, because I could understand the strategy behind it, as we're speaking about here, the process side of it, to say we're going to open up our own building division. I look at it this way: okay, I'm not an architect by trade, right? I haven't worked under an architect, although I've been around architecture for a long time in my career. There's a skill set there, there's a talent, there's a knowledge, there's experience, years under um, doing design. So for me to come in and be like, okay, there'd be a big learning curve, there'd be a lot to consider. Of course, you could align yourself with some good people, but there would have to be some knowledge from the top, right? As we're trying to integrate this. Building's no different, right? It's pretty technical, as you well know. And,
Absolutely.
any reservations as you're coming in saying, okay, I'm ready to bite this side of the apple, to do the fill vertical construction.
Sure, tons of reservations. It wasn't anything we did lightly. Something that we did out of necessity. This was in 2009, kind of in the recession. Work dried up at the high end kind of architecture office that I was employed at. Another architect that we were leasing space from was going to do work on his own house. kind of reframing the roof and everything. And so wasn't qualified to be a framer. I'd done carpentry work like for my dad,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is basically like one by kind of like trim, like a cabinet shop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but a friend of ours from architecture school had spent the previous summer working with a remodeler that customized in restoring bungalows in Old West Austin, and had during a gap year, had built an entire accessory dwelling unit behind his stepdad's property in West Austin. So, reach out to a friend, right? Like somebody who's walked that path, and that's who we collaborated with at the beginning, in terms of like the very first construction job, and then the project size that we were able to tackle was in line with the risk that we were comfortable with. So we really jumped into the fire, like doing some framing work on a roof on a project. But jobs after that were a deck, or were a bathroom remodel.
Hmm.
So, and we would always subcontract out licensed work, like working with an electrician, working with a plumber. So very early on, and maybe because of the architecture background, like architects already aren't going to build, right? They're going to hire a contractor. Then the contractor we know is going to hire all these subcontractors.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, there were kind of like know what you're good at, knew that we could draw, and knew that we had enough of a of a fearlessness to say like, okay, homeowner, if anything happens, like I'm on the hook for it, you know.
Hmm.
And I feel like uh, that was a big boost, I guess, like is to just be a little bit desperate, a little bit fearless, and be 100% honest.
I love that. And what's interesting is probably like many of us, I mean, pretty humble beginnings, right? Where you're not starting out building this 12,000 square foot house. I mean, you mentioned doing a deck, a bathroom. Um, those are two exact examples of me, when I started AFT, doing a deck and a
Mm.
bathroom, whatever you can do to start.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, super humble beginnings. Being always loved doing demo because it was so straightforward. It was easy to price relatively, and usually we
Mhm.
wouldn't lose money. Like at the very beginning of a job. Um, so and that's what it took, is I guess like kind of getting your hands dirty and getting in there, and through that process, learning, right? Like learning about how these houses or these spaces were put together, learning about how they fail, is was always just really exciting. And so I might have been inspired by books and drawings of the past, or traveling to famous buildings, or things like that, like during architecture school. But I took a lot of inspiration, biting the other side of the apple, and being a builder, and kind of getting to take things apart, that were either working fine but that weren't the right size, or were actually having serious problems, and then we could kind of see where the detailing went awry. Or in so many cases in Austin, these are buildings that were almost temporary in nature, right? Like kind of um, Sears homes, or homes built right after World War II, like in kind of these like first ring suburbs in the 50s,
Hmm.
where it's such a far cry from like kind of the building science standards of today.
Hmm.
These houses, yeah, they 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 last because they have overhangs, and a roof that gets replaced frequently,
Hmm.
not because they're landmarks of construction quality.
Yeah, that's good perspective. What's interesting about the building science side is I know that's a big part of what you're doing, from continuous insulation. And I believe when you and I had connected a while back, we were talking and you were speaking about like healthy cork insulation. Walk through how, what you're doing today. I mean, of course, you start with the deck and powder bath, and here you're doing these amazing projects now and incorporating building science. Why so passionate about the building science aspect of construction?
Yeah, I think early on, like in our kind of journey in school, like we co-founded Moon Tower with Jeff Munoz, Greg Esparza, and I. And Greg and I specifically were in architecture school together at University of Texas, and we There was a strong influence, like kind of an environmental sustainability, kind of ethos at the school. I
Hmm.
participated on the solar decathlon team that went to Washington D.C. to you build a project here in town, and then you ship it across. Um, I think like yeah, that environmental stewardship was always something that was important to us. Kind of your what's your role, maybe as a steward of a neighborhood, as a steward of the planet. So transitioning from like maybe the theoretical like kind of projects in school, which might some of them have like some really strong concepts around sustainability, into the real world and seeing where there's a lot of like manufacturers and products and stuff that might aid you down that path. I think in the kind of early 2000s, like no VOC paint was starting to be an option. Like that
Hmm.
was really interesting. Like you see a lot of like products that kind of like hit the market that can like help. But when it comes to really making a difference at the building level, it's about performance. Is what it was. That's what the solar decathlon was about. Kind of going to a zero energy, being able to get
Hmm.
everything from solar power, and then you're being able to have a balanced system where you're able to use the energy, uh, what you need based on like what you were able to store in your batteries and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so the real interesting thing about the firms that I got to work with is that when I got into practice, there were options where people cared about it as well. One of the firms I interned with was Spect Hartman at the time. It's Spect Novak now. And a project I got to do some graphics work for was called Zero House. And it was again, another kind of house that could be set up temporarily or shipped, like kind of remotely. And it has, kind of a solar panel array and completely off the grid
Hmm.
setup. And then I got to work on these houses with Patrick Alexander Architects, with a kind of a net zero builder out of Dallas, Texas. So it was always this part of my practice, like even getting to work for other architects. Um, and one of the great discoveries that I had whenever I was working with Patrick in his office was the discussion about like embodied energy is what we were talking about, more than 10 years ago there, and kind of turned him into a passionate believer in compressed earth blocks. So it's like you probably run into it in Arizona. It's where you're kind of like rammed earth. You're harvesting materials from a local area and then compressing them with kind of like hydraulic or pneumatic hydraulic equipment to make masonry units. Um, and then using the thermal properties of like thermal mass for these walls to build in a way where his dream was like kind of without air conditioning, even in kind of hot areas or humid areas.
Hmm.
Um, this is long-winded way of talking about some of these like thoughts in the beginning, but yeah, that building science from a performance standpoint alone wasn't the only like piece of the spectrum. So the embodied energy thing, and 10 years ago was embodied energy. And as the kind of climate change dialogue has become so mainstream and the science behind it has turned into carbon, that we talk about embodied carbon now.
Hmm.
And that's become this whole other piece of the spectrum to look at, right? Like the life cycle from mining or from harvesting to manufacturing components and building, like that first stage, um, or I think call it the second stage, right? Like the not the operational
Hmm.
energy, but the energy used in building the building. Um, is such a huge opportunity for reduction to help fight climate change. So that's stewardship, like
Hmm.
is the main, I guess, like concern here, is stewardship.
So the stewardship's interesting because I think there's a lot of value to be a good steward, right? I mean, that's one of our core values is like be a good steward of our client's investment, right? You take that sensitive based on, the trust they're given, the expense, these projects, and being a good steward of economy, a good steward of the environment, right? And resources and all those things, like you mentioned, carbon, making sure we're sourcing locally to help with the carbon footprint. Um, how difficult is it though for you to align with your clients? So, and what I mean by that is, some clients, I mean, I would imagine it's probably, I don't want to say a select few, but some of them aren't as concerned about maybe, some of the building science elements because, they have a budget like everyone, and there's certain things that they do want in their home. And so it's kind of this trade off, right? How do you balance just kind of your ethos, the stewardship, and call it building minimums in comparison to what the client's direction is in their budget?
Sure. Well, I think that at Moon Tower, we've been very pragmatic and flexible along these lines. And the kinds of things that I was interested in kind of while working at, other firms, and what we've done at Moon Tower is different. At Moon Tower, Greg, one of our co-founders, like we started to become, like, I'd say, highly sensitive to the conversation around this and our inability, right, or our choice to be so flexible that when put with the opportunity to build his own home, we went down an entirely different path. And by doing that and trying to find a solution for small home construction, single family construction that
Mm-hmm.
was as benign or good for the planet as possible, created a sister company called Cross Cabin Build and Supply. So as it stands today, like we're having tougher or more complex conversations, like with our team as we re-engage with the conversation about sustainability at Moon Tower, um, because of a lot of the research and the kind of efforts that we've done with our sister company, Cross Cabin. It's a little easier when you on that side. We're saying we're striking a hard line in the sand and saying, in order to maximum good, we have some real clear rules to follow. Seek these building materials that are mostly plants, free from plastics, free from harmful chemicals. And instead of starting with questions about like what does a building look like, we're starting questions with like what are we building out of? What goes into these materials? So it is it isn't always an easy conversation with clients if they are thinking about only aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very easy conversation when they start to care about what's in the materials, when they start
Mm-hmm.
to care about how it might affect their health, when it might affect the health of the people who are building the buildings. So yeah, we are seeing those conversations kind of broaden or open up and not be just about the bottom line and the looks of a project when when we introduce these other concepts of health primarily, and when the people are really passionate and interested in choices that could be good for the planet from a carbon standpoint. um, if they're asking those questions, like now we actually have some methods and some products that and filters that we can look through that we didn't have as much of a perspective on.
It's really interesting. I think you broke that down really well, Frank. When you're looking at the building science elements, do you have like some base standards? Like if I were to hire you and say, Frank, I'm ready for you to design and build my house. What are some of the building standards that you have in regards to low carbon, in regards to building science?
Sure. So on the building science side of things, we are very much in a performance, like kind of mindset. So yeah, like the airtightness is huge for us. Standards for um, building to detail for airtightness and reduce thermal breaks. So that's on the design side, specifying. We're using a lot of zip historically right now. We also have a relationship with VaporShield through Cross Cabin, and we're starting to use some of those products more. Um, so yeah, air sealing is important, and then kind of like great HVAC design. If I'm going to kind of stay on air for a minute, um, variable refrigerant flow units, like so you have like a more control over how much energy you're using to heat and
Mm-hmm.
cool. And in our area, dehumidification as well is really important. And then on a few jobs where we have a little bit more to spend, we can even do the ERV So when we're having our fresh air come in, that we can do an energy exchange in the ERV units. Um, and on the insulation side, we've been doing spray foam with a lot of projects, and we're starting to shift again from a carbon standpoint, move towards plant-based insulations. So that's been cool. We had one of our first projects that we were able to kind of make a substitution on that
Hmm.
this year, where on a project where we had spray foam specified throughout, we continued to use it in a couple like vaulted spaces, but everywhere else we switched to timber HP, which is a kind of recycled wood fiber insulation product. Um, that's that's the direction that we're trying to move in, right? Is to shift the kind of standards and the things that we were using that we took for granted as, hey, this is the most efficient and affordable, most common way that we're building right now in our market, and find ways to make some switches that start to decarbonize.
It's really smart. And you mentioned, even early on, what kind of intrigued you, the low VOC, because that started becoming. I had some clients probably 8 years ago that were really obsessed about low VOC content, right, and off gassing, and not just from paint and stain and other things that go into the home as you're building, working under construction, but also the furniture they put in, and they're really concerned about
Mhm.
that. And you know, it's interesting how then the pandemic hits and people all of a sudden become aware of what they're breathing. They become aware of what they're drinking, and companies like Delos, and there's a lot of companies out there that are really looking at air filtration, water filtration, and um, the off gassing that goes in. There's designers I've had on the podcast that are obsessed. I should say obsessed, but very passionate about the end product they're putting in, the fabric they're putting in, to make sure that they're creating a healthy environment for their clients.
It's awesome. I mean, the amount of thoughtfulness that can be approached like in the build world is really incredible. And I think that the exciting thing is the rate of change. I think too, the residential market can be a little slower to adopt and
Mm-hmm.
adapt. You were talking about interiors specifically, and I feel like the commercial categories of furniture makers and office supply stuff. We were at a tour of like the Decor appliance showroom in Chicago, and it was at the Materials Mart. You kind of go to some of the other
Mm-hmm.
floors, and you see these other companies, and they have a heavy commercial kind of bent and presence. But all of these brands are advocating and showcasing the kinds of changes, initiatives, material science, and research that they're doing to make sure that they are addressing decarbonization or the kind of closed um, circular economy like kind of aspects, uh, in in their product line or in their manufacturing processes. And you don't see that as much, in the residential side, like at front and center. So I think it's coming, like just because like so many of these other brands, like in the commercial space, have already like kind of tied into it. And I mean, there's like some very common sense things too that we've encountered, right, as a remodeling company. Like
Mm-hmm.
the most environmentally friendly from a carbon standpoint house is the one that's already built.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so
Right.
often, that we're asked to work with, right, expand what's there, or make the space that they have work better to avoid the addition, doing an addition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that that are really pragmatic. Those same conversations are happening in the commercial world, but I think there's fewer people that are pushing like maybe these kinds of uh, healthy and maybe carbon kind of like accountability at the residential product market than they are on the commercial side.
Do you feel that taking, being this passionate, as far as a good steward, do you feel it's given you a competitive advantage?
I would say that we don't talk about it enough on the like moon tower side of things. We've talked about like especially on the sustainability front, and that's why I think there was so much room for Cross Cabin to kind of exist as a sister company for us.
Hmm.
Um, I think that the stewardship piece has been huge for the respect for remodeling, like in the kind of competitive advantage that there has been that a lot of builders and architects like in our market might say, I'm going to focus on new construction. Like I have a kind of clean slate. I can design my vision. I'm a builder. I can design with building science that has no compromises. Building science standards that has no compromises or no gray lines as I'm kind of transitioning from new to old. Um, and so, being a remodeler who's not just operating out of a truck, who's also not like super volume focused
Hmm.
and is a piece of the sustainable, a kind of initiative, and has been a part of a competitive advantage, but not in the same way that it is when we take a more clear stand, and you kind of really put yourself out there as maybe a healthy home builder or a passive house builder. Those are things that we're keeping our eyes on. Like, do we want to kind of go 100%, over there? And a lot of the people who've made those kinds of leaps are imploring us to do so. They're like, hey, it's cowardly, right? To kind of stay that flexible or be that pragmatic. Um, but like that's where the responsibility of aligning a lot of different people and providing the kind of the jobs that we do, for our team and stuff, feels more risky, right? So it might be the kind of thinking small piece of me that keeps us doing what we've done, as opposed to major sea changes, on the moon tower side.
It's really fascinating. I mean, as you think about, because there's a few builders I know that are very similar to you in the sense, Frank, that they really are pushing the boundary. I mean, we've been very fortunate to do some net zero projects. I mean, we have one in design that should be starting shortly. We have another one that just broke ground. And um, I don't know if you know Mark LaLiberte, we worked with him on his project. And um, I actually really enjoy, right? The thought process behind it and the coordination. And, we worked with Positive Energy, who's there by you. I mean, not too
Yeah.
far. I feel like in Austin, um, for some reason, there are a lot of builders that are really pushing the envelope as far as sustainability. And why is that?
Well, I mean, I think it's like part of the culture here. Um, there is a presence of nature in Austin, in Texas, that's a little different than Houston and Dallas and El Paso and San Antonio, like the other
Mhm.
really big markets. The city's organized around the river. It's on the edge of the hill country, and it's on top of and at the edge of a huge aquifer recharge zone. Um, so there's just some unique kind of geologic and natural things that are happening here. Austin's famous for Barton Springs. There was a huge development protest for like a shopping mall that was in the recharge zone, or kind of the tributary area of Barton Springs. Save Our Springs was this rally cry for environmentalism and activism. Um, so the culture here is a little different than the rest of Texas, because right, you'd be like in an energy state, like uh, oil from the the oil rush or whatever. Now the natural gas rush. So there is that history in Texas. And Austin's been a little. It's just been maybe different. It hasn't hung with the economies of those other cities. Austin has been slower to develop because it was maybe a capital and college town, for a lot longer than some of the other cities. So yeah, but yeah, people like Reisinger, and I mean Mesger and guys on the Build Network that are here in Austin, but other like amazing builders here in Austin, Richard Martin, Daglish. There's lots of just high quality work that's going on here, but I do think that the building science bent. Um, also just comes from some of that a pursuit of quality. Anytime I think when you're chasing quality, you're going to be intrigued by efficiency, right? Like if you're, I remember my dad talking about production carpentry in a wood shop and talking about how laying out a cabinet, timing himself to do the first one, and then saying like, okay, can I do better the next time, and so on, right? To find out like, well, what's your how fast can you build these stage flats or these cabinet boxes? That you're always when you're a crafts person, that you're kind of always gamifying it or kind of finding efficiencies and things like that. And I don't think it's unique to Austin that that pursuit for quality would lead you to building science, but I do think that there's a community in Austin that is more environmentally aware and more environmentally concerned, or at least wears it on their sleeve a little bit more than in other Texas communities.
It's interesting because I've had Luke Mesger, I've had Matt Reisengron, of course, Matt Schoberg. I toured some of his stuff down there, and
Yeah.
Matt's doing some nice, I mean, even all of his, he's using, LSLs for all his interior walls. And, just every time I've been to Austin and toured different builders and, Frank Fortune, we were introduced, and next time I'm there, I'm going to hit you up. But it's amazing what you guys are doing. I mean, it's a highly competitive space. Your architecture is pretty unique there. I think there's a lot of architectural inspiration you guys have that I've seen kind of flourish around the country. And, a lot of people are drawn to, um, to what you guys are doing. I think it's a pretty unique hybrid of talent out there.
Yeah, it's great to hear you say that, Brad. Yeah, I mean, the interior designers here are amazing. The architects here are amazing. The builders, yeah. So it's a really fruitful place to be practicing. Um, and you know, you asked about kind of like where do I get the where do we get the even the idea to go out on our own and try the other side of the apple?
Right. Right.
Um, I think that Austin um, has a very supportive community to it. I don't know exactly where it comes from. If it's all part of the Texas origins, like it was a kind of a Native American. It comes from like a Native American word, tejas,
Hmm.
which means friend. Like in that language, like maybe there is this notion of being friendly, just in the kind of like the Texas area. But I think maybe in Austin it was also just historically smaller, than really big metropolitan areas. But yeah, Killy, you mentioned at the beginning, like how she introduced us. Uh, for example, amazing interior designer, even more amazing, just human and friendly person, right?
Hmm.
So we we're a builder, we're a design builder. We do interior design sometimes. I've started working with a couple other builders who we had met through a contractors like kind of coaching group, like a support group that was the BTA Breakthrough Academy. Was this group that we had met some of these other contractors through. Promotes knowledge sharing in non-competitive markets and stuff. Um, but we were like, why can't we bring some of the same like generosity home? There's already the spirit of sharing, I think, in Austin, that it's less about cutthroat competition here. And we created a happy hour, meets once a month. We call it the Guild Hour, and it's builders, it's interior designers, architects, structural engineers, subcontractors, like a lot of different people come to this, and we're almost to like 1 year of doing it. um, but it's been a really wonderful thing. You end up like maybe referring each other accountants or somebody who's a specialist that's adjacent to our work. um, and I know that there's collaborative, markets elsewhere, but a lot of people who move here from those markets will often share with me that it feels special here, feels different. Rarely can they like exactly, name it, but I just think let's just call it a neighborly, friendly, collaborative environment. Really is pervasive here.
Yeah, you don't see that very often. I don't think many markets are like that, which is pretty unique. You mentioned the BTA, the Breakthrough Academy. I've never heard that.
Mhm.
So what is that?
So it's a coaching program for trades and contractors. Uh, and it's based originally in Canada, but they have a big presence in the US as well. Um, and we worked with them for 4 years, and I mean, we pretty much doubled the size of our company through the process of working with them, and really started to just organize our business in a more professional way. Because not only was I not a contractor, right, before we started a design build, I also wasn't a business person. You know, I wasn't an accountant by any, uh, by any stretch. So, yeah, like there's just so much that we don't know out there, and when you kind of harness the power of your peers, you can go further faster. But yeah, Breakthrough Academy was really cool, and it's not only was it here, let's share some techniques, but they kind of take you through sales, like how to do sales better, how to do hiring better, how to organize your company, and talk about org charts and balance sheets, and the whole business side of construction that we don't usually get to. I didn't see when I was watching This Old House growing up.
Hmm. How has that changed? You bring in it's interesting. I think many of us can relate to the business aspect because none of us were trained in business, and you're figuring it
Right.
out essentially on the fly, or you have good networking groups, or you build a 20, or the BTA as you mentioned.
Sure.
How has your company evolved just from a business aspect?
How's it evolved?
Yeah, knowing your
Yeah.
business now as opposed to when you first started.
Oh yeah.
Maybe ideally more profitable now too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's up and down. But the cool thing, like you feel like you're readdressing things over and over. Some things are kind of you revisit a business plan every year. You look at a budget every year. You talk about we SWOT every year. Yeah, your employment agreements get a little more refined. It can feel Sisyphusian, right? It can feel never ending, or like you're on this hamster wheel. And I always talk about it like whatever it feels like a circle, it's only because we're looking at it from above. And as soon as you take a perspective and look at it from the side, you can see how you've been spiraling up. Like, do you have more organization? Are there more standards, in place that help us bring on new people? Um, do you as an individual have a little bit more time for the work life balance? It's something that's been really successful for us, is to check in with the employees and really fine tune the number of people that we have, the number of projects, to where people are clocking those kind of 40 and 45-hour weeks on the regular, as opposed to what a lot of people interview with us and talk about. They're leaving places where they're working 70 and 80-hour weeks, and they're being just grinded into a place where they burn out.
Yeah, and that part's tough. I think, what have you found to be successful to make sure that your team isn't getting burnout, right? The reality is whether you're architecture, whether you're construction, whether you're interior design, it can be high stress. It can be a grind, a lot of hours you're putting in. I mean, there's a lot to it, right? That you're balancing and managing. How do you make sure that there is, this work-life balance, with your team?
I think most of the success that we've had there has come from listening to our employees, and um, hearing them out whenever they're taxed. And we used to organize the company, especially early on when the projects were smaller, where one person would quarterback an entire project, do all the initial city research, do the design work, do the estimating, do the project management, do the punch list walk. Like, they were, yes, small projects. Pardon me. Yes, they were small projects, but we were still asking people to do a lot, and we'd ask them to do multiple projects. And so we've evolved to have some specializations, have more handoffs, and as you ask less of people, like comprehensively, you build in some redundancy into the roles, so that when people go out of town, and it used to, freeze a project, now you
Hmm.
have somebody next to you and they can slide over because they're not on vacation, and
Hmm.
they have a manageable workload. Um, yeah, so I think like listening to your team, and taking to heart when they are underwater, and not just saying construction's like this. We're always under a
Mhm.
deadline. We always have clients who need to move in, deal with it. Instead of just saying deal with it, you kind of look back at the organization and say, like, do we have the right amount of people? Did we set the schedule correctly? Do we have the proper estimate? Um, and make adjustments moving forward.
I love that because the reality is, to what you're breaking down is something I've seen. If you have processes and systems and organization in place, that yeah, ideally, once you have enough revenue, and you have the right amount of staff, that when people are out of town, they can take over because it's fairly seamless once you know their role, once you know what they're working on, and you have that crossover.
Yeah, and when you're really small, maybe a lone operator, and you have some really great subcontractors or carpenters, that you might be working with. You might have some similar opportunities for seamlessness based on the quality and the relationships that you build. Um, so it doesn't have to like go with a big company, but like it really does. It just changes the dynamic. To where you're not just relying on the relationships. You're also relying on the systems.
Well, you mentioned you've done projects with other architects. So how does that work? I mean, complex of the, what's the breakdown of your company as far as, I mean, you are design build, so you have that capability to do full turnkey from interior design and architecture and building. How often are you doing full turnkey? Do you have portions of that where you're working with other firms?
Yeah. Right now, it is still our dominant work type. I mean, I think it's probably 85 to 90% of what we're doing is turnkey. Um, I mentioned kind of growing the company, maybe kind of doubling in size. And that took part when we also closed the doors to working for other architects. We'd had a couple of homes on the homes tour for other architects. They were in the under 3,000 square feet. We're building infill projects in Austin. The average lots are in the 7,000 to 8,000 square feet
Yeah,
lot
smaller
sizes.
lots. Hmm.
Mhm. So we do a lot of infill work, and we had done some fantastic projects with architects, but we had kind of plateaued in like our ability to take on more work and to get consistent uh, outcomes for the clients working with the architects. Because at that time, we weren't asking individuals to do all of the design and the construction on jobs, but we were asking our project managers to do all the estimating, all of the project planning, all of the communication, and all the budget work on clients, as well as site supervision. Um, and we were just seeing some very different results when we from job to job. So what we did is we said we're going to pause on working with the other architects because that's another variable that we were juggling. We're going to just do our design build pipeline, and we're going to add an estimator so we had consistent planning and pricing. And then we're going to change the project management. I call it Renaissance project management model. We're going to change that to site supervision by superintendents and budget and schedule management client comms from project managers. So it took us about 2 years. It's kind of like a cycle for us to kind of move through a bunch of projects. But we were happy with the consistency that we were getting there. We opened up the work to build with other interior designers and architects again, and we've seen that grow from nothing again to 10 to 15% of our revenue. So we are in this reintroduction phase where we're reconnecting with our architect friends and interior designers, and offering the fixed price construction that we do now. We used to do everything cost plus, like back in the day when we also, why did that coincide with us not having a full time estimator and project managers?
Right.
Because we didn't
Right.
have as much time to plan projects.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
How's that been doing the fixed price model? Do you feel it's been successful for you?
yeah, I think that the biggest success is the client like peace of mind. Instead of uh, starting a project with a what was a realistic like impression of what the budget was going to be, and ending a project with 20%, 50% more, um, and no fault to the owners being very confused, upset, um, disappointed, like in that process, no matter how many conversations and how much um, kind of horse trading happens with you and an architect on a job to try to basically mitigate some of the costs that a homeowner is going to feel.
Hmm.
uh, it doesn't feel as professional. It doesn't feel as professional for a homeowner to ask, like, why didn't you guys see this,
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, as we switch to fixed price, it's only come with so much more confidence and client satisfaction. As they move through a project, they see the draws come in according to the plan. And we
Hmm.
said, no, we can't start things without, these, um,
Selections.
yeah, selections or these
Mhm.
cross-referenced engineering drawings with the architecture plans. Like, um, because we used to start things with a permit set that was approved.
Hmm.
Yeah, they might have had a supporting engineering set, but they came at different times, and nobody had cross-referenced everything. Um, Yeah, or we had 50% of the selections were allowances. And then when the choice did come, it actually had um, with it not only a material upgrade, but now the tile setter is a whole nother category of skill that we have to pay more for that. We used to run into that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's just amazing to see what your company's done, Frank. I think it's pretty impressive from where, you were dabbling into construction to what you're doing now in these incredible projects. And, kudos to you because it's not easy. I mean, a lot of us that have been through growth around a company, we know the amount of effort you put in and you're kind of doing double duty between architecture and construction.
Oh, thanks, Brad. Yeah, I mean, that's just because of all these podcasts out there, right? That I've been able to learn so much on drives across town.
Yeah. Or else your BTA, your Breakthrough Academy. So what
Yeah.
is best advice you've been given?
Oh man, gosh. Over the years, so much of it, it'll kind of come back to the foundational stuff about, do what you're gonna do, what you say.
Yeah.
Um, treat others the way you want to be treated. Um, there's lots of little tips here and there, um, but the quality of your integrity and the relationships that you keep and is got to be top advice. And it's the stuff that kind of guides us through internal conversations, with each other, um, conversations with our subcontractors, right, and then also with our clients
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
work
That's really,
that we're trying to produce for them.
yeah. It's hard to beat. I mean, if you could have integrity in this business, it'll take you a long way. What do you do for fun?
For fun right now, hang out with the family. Got two kids, Ford and Lily, and my wife Katie. She also works with us, so we get a lot of
It's
time
awesome.
together. Yeah, she was a commercial interior designer, and then after taking a little time off with our second Lily,
Hmm.
she when she came back, it was right before COVID hit. And when
Okay.
she came back to work, she came to be a purchasing manager with us, which has been another awesome specialization that's helped our team out a ton.
Oh, I'm sure having her resource too with you doing the full turnkey, I mean, it makes a big difference.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. So for those listening, where can they find you?
For us, Moon Tower Austin, we're on Instagram. That's one of like the easiest ways to look us up. And then moontower.austin.com online. Cross Cabin Build is our sister company on crosscabinbuild.com, and then Cross Cabin on Instagram.
It's awesome. Well, Frank, you've been amazing. I appreciate making time for us today.
No, I really appreciate it, Brad. Thank you so much.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So, again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.